From being a top half Premier League club to being in the depths of League Two, the fourth tier of English football, after having won 2 league titles, that being First Division, 2 FA Cups, a Community Shield and a League Cup, this is the downfall of Portsmouth SC, otherwise known as Pompey. Portsmouth is a very unique city like no other. It's located on the south coast of Britain and has a population of 250,000 within the actual city of Portsmouth. However, the surrounding area has around 800,000 people that live there. There is a few reasons why it's such a unique city. Now, one of them being that it is actually the only city in the entirety of the UK to be an island. You might not be able to see it when you look at a map. It doesn't look like an island, but if you zoom in very closely, you can see that there is water surrounding the whole of Portsmouth, and there is now man-made structures to fill that in, but it is still technically an island, and the island of Portsmouth is known as Portsea Island. Another reason why it's so famous and unique is obviously it's a port city, a naval base, a lot of docks. That's the main industry there: boats, ships, whatever it may be, ferries. But also it is the northernmost southern town. Now, that is a phrase a lot of people from Pompey will understand, but if you don't understand what that means, is because of the deprivation rate and a lot of poverty that is in Portsmouth there, because it is an industrial town, a lot of working class people there, they more associate themselves not with the rest of southern England, with the higher house prices and a lot of middle class. They more associate themselves with being a northern town. Now, geographically it doesn't make sense, but when you actually look at Portsmouth and the people and the working class environment there, it is very similar to the likes of Sunderland, to the likes of a lot of coastal towns up north, Grimsby, Barrow, wherever it may be, and it is very similar to there. So the idea that they are a northern town maybe geographically doesn't work, but I would argue culturally, I definitely think they could make that statement. So there's the backstory on the city of Portsmouth. Let's get into why the football club is at the heart of this city and the sad downfall of it. But yeah, the way we're going to be structuring this is we're going to go through the peak of Pompey, their FA Cup wins, how they finished 8th in the Premier League. Then we're going to have a look at what the problem was. Was it always there? Was it solvable? And then the downfall and the lowest, where Pompey fell, and where they are now and what the future brings, and is there hope for a Premier League side, Portsmouth, to come back and flourish in 2023 in the English footballing game. It's 1998 and Pompey are stuck in the second tier of English football, fighting for relegation year on year, and now in 1998 to 1999 there are financial difficulties starting to creep in. However, all is well because these were only temporary and success was on the horizon. One of the starting and the main factors in this success was manager Graham Rix was sacked after a poor run of results in 2001, and the director of football, the recently appointed Harry Redknapp, took over the job, and the following year in the 2002 championship season won the Division 1 title, gaining Portsmouth FC automatic promotion to the Premier League. Harry Redknapp's time at Portsmouth FC is very confusing, to say the least. That would be actually a very big understatement. We all know Harry Redknapp in 1995 to 2001 managed West Ham. He then went and joined Sporting as a sporting director for Portsmouth. He then became the manager in 2001. However, this only lasted until midway through his second Premier League season, because he was then compelled into offering his resignation after a disagreement with then chairman Milan Mandaric. However, this is not the last you hear or see from Harry Redknapp. He then goes and joins their closest rivals for less than a year, with that obviously being Southampton FC. He then goes and joins back Portsmouth FC in the 05-06 era, and then leaves in the 08-09 era. Now, a few things to break down. You might be thinking, why was he compelled into resignation? Was this disagreement because of poor form? And the answer to that would be definitely not. Portsmouth FC were, in fact, I would argue, overachieving in, so he definitely did not deserve that. And then joining back to Portsmouth FC after being, the Southampton manager for a year, Portsmouth fans were, wary. Portsmouth fans were a bit disappointed because you would not want your manager joining your closest rivals, although it is a little bit more forgiving than a player. Sam Allardyce obviously managing both Newcastle and Sunderland. There is many other managers similar to that, such as Steve Bruce. However, a fun fact for the people watching, hopefully you find this interesting, Harry Redknapp now actually resides in Portsmouth. He lives in Portsmouth, having managed the likes of Tottenham, having managed the likes of Bournemouth, West Ham, Southampton. He still resides in Portsmouth and he still lives there to this day. I do also think it's important to mention the fact that both Harry Redknapp and the then owner Milan Mandaric were also both accused of tax evasion during their time at Portsmouth. This accusation came about in 2012, but I just thought that was important in mentioning. But now moving on, 2006, a change in ownership followed as the club was actually bought by businessmen. Sorry, I had to look up the name of the businessman again, but it is Guy Darmac, Alexandra Guy Darmac, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm not 100% correct on that one, or 100% sure if you will. However, this did allow Portsmouth to buy practically a whole new first team. Now, this will be the bit that a lot of you will know. If you don't know this, in the summer of 2007, everybody was getting hyped and everybody was getting excited because Portsmouth had basically signed like 7 or 8 new players, and we're talking very well-known players, if not up-and-coming players like Andy Cole, like David James, like Sol Campbell. 3 English legends who you all should know were playing for Pompey at one point. And this really did work because the following season, Portsmouth, this was under Harry Redknapp, remember now, finished 9th in that season, and that was for the very first time since 1950. They were 1 single point away from European qualification. Now, for me, that is a magical story from Division 2 all the way to the Premier League, and if it stayed at that, this would be a wonderful little fairy tale. However, it did not stay at that. However, Harry Redknapp was then rewarded with a new contract, which was supposed to keep him at the helm till 2011. However, we don't. However, we know that not to be true. But the following season in the summer, new signings were made, with one of them being Jermaine Defoe, Sunderland legend, but, playing for Pompey at this time. And they ended up beating that record of finishing 9th, finishing 8th the next season. And this success continued to basically come at them with a packed Wembley Stadium on the 17th of May 2008. A lot of Pompey fans will know this, or every Pompey fan should know this. They actually won the FA Cup. This is phenomenal stuff. Realistically, awaited from them in the future is financial crisis, and we'll get into that. But at this point, at the height of their success, they're finishing 8th in the Premier League. They've got an FA Cup under the belt. It is a phenomenal time in Pompey's history, some of the best and greatest success they will ever see as a club and have ever seen. But what awaited on the horizon was not good, to say the least. After that historic win against Cardiff City in the FA Cup final, and it cannot be underestimated how significant this was in Pompey's history. To win an FA Cup final is one thing, but to win one as recently as they have, it was definitely the peak of their success. And Harry Redknapp actually, still to this day, is the only Englishman, or sorry, not the only Englishman, but he is still the last Englishman to win a major trophy within English football, that being in a managerial aspect. But Harry Redknapp after this actually resigned, and in came, I believe, the name Avram Grant, who actually ended up becoming the manager in November of 2009. However, this was actually when the financial difficulties started to arise, and it was getting really bad. With this new squad that they got of David James, Sol Campbell, Jermaine Defoe, very high wages, very high transfer fees, and basically they could not keep up with this, and they started having to actually offload players. If you understand the story of Leeds United in the 90s, it's very similar to that. They're buying players that they ultimately cannot afford in the long run, and that's the exact same thing as what happened. They started having to sell players like Las Diarra and Jermaine Defoe to the likes of Real Madrid and Spurs, and ultimately that actually ended up giving them $35 million. Pounds. However, this still wasn't really enough, and it was also weakening the squad ultimately. Another change in ownership actually followed, where this is actually a key pattern. A lot of changes in ownership, a lot of stakes in the clubs being changed about, and this ownership only lasted 40 days until, I believe, it was an Arab businessman called Sulaiman Al Fahim purchased the club for around £60 million. However, I believe 40 days later, someone linked to that same businessman went and bought 90% of his stake. Basically, it's all a financial mess. Loads of people are buying the club. The club's been sold every 5 years. People don't understand the finances. They're buying too many players that they can't afford. And this was then later reinforced as prized assets such as Peter Crouch, such as Sylvian Diston, such as Glenn Johnson were actually sold. And this ultimately weakened the squad going into the 2010 season, where the club actually admitted in October of 2010 that they were in 2009, they were short of finances and some players and staff weren't being paid. Then in March 2010, the administrator for Portsmouth actually revealed that the club were looking to start a new season with a whole new squad, which people got excited about, which sounds like a fresh new start. However, it was then revealed that these players would just be free transfers, they would be free agents, and basically they were replacing a lot of these expensive, experienced footballers with unknown players, basically weakening the squad in order to keep the club's finances afloat and keep the club alive. Later on in that season, Pompey actually managed to get to an FA Cup final, which for me is some sort of miracle. They then lost 2-0 to Chelsea. Now that would be considered a very good season given the circumstances. However, they did finish rock bottom of the Premier League, 16 points afloat from relegation, from being safe from relegation. So for me, a very unsuccessful season, and this is really the turning point where the downfall starts to happen. They were then playing the 2011 season in the Championship after having a terrible Premier League season and getting these free transfers who clearly didn't work out. The club's finances were absolutely horrific, and there really was no hope of getting that automatic promotion. It was more about surviving in the Championship. It's more about keeping the club afloat even longer. But let's see what happens in the next part of this story. Let's pick up with a glimmer of hope. In 2010, Steve Cotterill was appointed as the manager, and although the club was in financial difficulties, and they can be described to be very, very dire financial difficulties, however, the Englishman helped Pompey achieve some stability during the times. However, there was possible liquidation of the club, and in their first season in the Championship, they finished 16th. So they didn't do a Sunderland and get straight relegated into League One or Division 2 at the time, but 16th into the Championship after being relegated from the Premier League isn't exactly the bounce back that you want, especially when there's financial difficulties going on as well. Hopefully you'd want some sort of on-field performances, some fight, but at least they are staying afloat in the Championship. In June 2011, a year onwards, Pompey was actually purchased by Converse Sports Initiatives, owned by, I believe, to be a Russian oligarch named Vladimir Antonov, and completed its takeover of the club. And to make matters worse, Steve Cotterill, the manager who had kept them afloat that season, was actually being, offered jobs elsewhere. For example, Nottingham Forest, where he joined in October 2011. Basically, following his departure, Michael Appleton was announced as the manager. To skip forward a little bit here, Antonov, the person who we've just introduced as buying the club, actually resigned as the chairman. Again, another change in ownership, showing that there's key problems within the core of Portsmouth FC. But this was actually because the parent company to Converse Sports Initiatives, basically a company that was heavily linked with them, actually entered administration, so ceased to exist or was on the brink of ceasing to exist. Now, a year on from that, Portsmouth, this being in 2012, Portsmouth were issued with basically unpaid taxes by HMRC, and they were actually a total of 1.6 million. This basically meant the club had to go into administration for the second time in 2 years, giving them another 10-point deduction. So not only do we have problems on the field with there being deductions, and also the fact that they're facing relegation into Division 2, that being League 1, but also we now have the club on the brink of not ceasing to exist. And we've seen this happen before with the likes of Bury FC, and look at where they are now. Pompey could have ended up like Bury FC. Now, luckily that's not the case. Spoiler alert, as no, Pompey are now in League 1, battling for promotion next season, hopefully. But we'll get a little bit more into what happens after this. So in 2012-13, Pompey were unable to find a manager. Basically, no one was willing to join them for the long term because of unpaid wages that had been circling around in the media, and also stuff like there's not enough money to be spent on players, so you have to deal with the players you've got, and you've also got the risk of these players actually just ended up being sold because of the financial problems. And also it's a tough job to take during this time, and a lot of the supporters are obviously frustrated and not really going to be backing you to what you would get with a normal club who weren't in these financial dire straits. But the club then went on to a record winless run, 20 games unbeaten. Clearly it's not going well for Pompey in this time, and I'm not going to bore you exactly with the details, but Pompey are relegated into Division 2 at this point, that being League 1 where they actually stand today. But it does actually get worse for Pompey. Now, Pompey then in 2014, I believe, actually ended up getting relegated into Division 3, that being Division 3, that being League 2 as it currently stands. However, good times, I suppose, were on the horizons for Pompey, not with on-field success, but the club finally was in control of, good hands, that being the Portsmouth Supporters Trust. Basically, group of fans have got together, raised enough money to buy the club, and eventually the financial situation just settled out. Now, they were no longer challenging for FA Cup titles, they were no longer challenging for top half Premier League football, but at least they had kept control of their club. And I think this really needs to be highlighted, the solidarity within football, and especially Pompey FC, Portsmouth FC, as we see right here. They band together, they come together and to keep their club afloat, and I think it's a phenomenal thing to see, really. So at least they've got the club back, but they are actually in the fourth tier of English football. Now we'll go on to where they stand now, and we'll go on to that promotion in the third tier and what's happened over the past few years. The lowest point of Portsmouth FC's history was 16th in League 2, and they spent 4 terrible years in the depths of the footballing pyramid. However, in the 2016-17 season, they managed to clinch the title, and it wasn't by a landslide, it was by goal difference, and they were only 2 points off not even gaining automatic promotion. Clearly, this was the point where Portsmouth FC could turn things around, and I wish I could say that was true. There is no fairy tale ending to this story. Portsmouth are still in League 1 to this day. It is now the 2023/4 season, that being 7 years on, and they still haven't managed to get out of League 1. However, there is hope on the horizon. A lot of these big teams that have been stuck in League 1, we were there for a while, that being Sunderland, Ipswich were there for a while, Sheffield Wednesday, have all managed to escape the ladder, escape League 1, and I believe it to be the toughest league in English football. It is an absolute abyss, that league. However, I believe this to be Pompey's year, with some good signings, with some managing the finances correctly this time around. They could see themselves being a championship side, not this year, but the year after, and eventually I do believe they will be in the Premier League once again. However, their fans have not dwindled in size. They are still as loud as ever. I credit them as having some of the greatest fans I've ever seen. We faced them at Wembley multiple times, and they were absolutely unbelievable. I've seen them at the Sol, at Fratten Park, wherever it is. They are the loudest bunch of fans known to English football, and I definitely think they deserve better. For me, I want to see them in the Premier League. I like Portsmouth as a city, and I like Portsmouth as a football club, and I think that their time will come soon. They have been patient, they have been waiting, and I think once again they will rise to the heights of English football. So if you enjoyed this little, it was actually quite a long video to make, and I did make a few mistakes throughout. I can't really be bothered redoing it. It is 5 in the morning right now, so if that doesn't deserve a like from all the Portsmouth fans out there watching, although I doubt many of you will, because you should already know this story. But yeah, please do like, please do subscribe. This took absolutely ages. But yeah, I appreciate you all, and have a fantastic day, especially Portsmouth fans.